Hey, Batista here, and welcome to Week 5 Power Rankings for VDL Season 8. This week, it's just me by myself, so hopefully this is still enjoyable for anyone who watches. But with that, let's get into the matches. So here we are. So before we start with our Week 5 matches, we have one match which was from Week 4 that we didn't include in our previous Power Rankings, which was the Rolled Gold Pretzels versus the Tentacle Pirates. So this I think ended up happening the day like right as we were recording Power Rankings for last week. And so with this, we can get into the match. It was a 2-1 in favor of the Tentacle Pirates, and it ended up being a fairly close match. But one of the big things I think Game One ended up being that they ended up bringing a Lapras Scarf Lapras in order to deal with Landorus Incarnate, and however, they did not EV train to survive a Glassy Glide from Rillaboom, and so it got one shot. And I think at some point, if it would have been able to take that and kill the Landers, they probably would have been able to get the win. But it ended up coming down pretty much that damage roll, or that not damage roll, depending on. But I'm pretty sure Lapras could have been EV trained to survive that. So definitely ends up being a little bit awkward. Game two, the Pretzels were able to position themselves pretty well in order to get a Moxie sweep done with Heracross, where they were able to get a couple of situations where they were able to outspeed or finish off some Pokemon, and Heracross ended up just getting all 4 kills. The final match ended up being pretty convincing win for the Pirates, in which the Pretzels kind of just ended up getting out of position pretty early on and couldn't really recover. With that, we can get into week 5. So week 5, we have the Bistro Bewares versus the Mad Rex. So this was a 3-game set, so it was pretty interesting. So the Bewares have the Hatterene Indeedee core. So game 1, they were strong predicting or trying to set up the Trick Room on turn or like on the early turns, and Rex strongly tried to prevent Trick Room from coming up. So their Rex's plan to prevent Trick Room was Sludge Wave on a Nihilego and Snipe Shot, which ignores redirection on an Inteleon with Sniper and Scope Lens. So turn 1, the Hatterene ended up protecting, which ended up being very tricky for the for Rex, because they were actually able to get a Psycho cut that one shot the Nihilego. And then, so what ended up happening on turn 2 is that Rex had to go for a Snipe Shot, and they needed a crit. They got the crit, killing Hatterene and preventing Trick Room. And from there, without Trick Room being up, Rex was able to, I think, get a pretty solid win, just by outspeeding some of their mons, being pretty bulky, and I think choice band rock slides from Buffalon. So match 2, the Bewares ended up leading Hitmonlee in AD female, with the Unburdened Electric Seed or Psychic Seed on the Hitmonlee. And NDD ended up faking out an Articuno, which was scarfed, and they were going to Tailwind to get some speed control. The Psychic Terrain doesn't affect NDD in the situation because Articuno is flying type, and from there they basically were kind of able to get into position where Hitmonlee just kind of dominated them. They never had speed control and were able to very convincingly win game 2. Game 3 ended up being, a little bit closer. I know the weakness policy bulky Latios with um, stored power and Roos ended up doing a lot of work. The choice band Buffalon with rock slides ended up doing work. I think it ended up one-shotting an Inte. And so it was definitely an interesting set in that aspect, in which Buffalon did a lot of work and Hitmonlee did a lot of work. Some mons, some lower tier mons that ended up being very powerful. Next up, we have the Atlanta Talonflames against the Migrating Melodics. The Melodics were able to win 2-0. So game 1 ended up being pretty comparable to the last couple matches to the Atlanta Talonflames. The Talonflames ended up leading the Crobat with the hopes of getting up Tailwind. The Melodics ended up leading a Scarfmon, specifically Garchomp with and they were able to slower its speed with Rock Tomb and then finish it up before it could set up Tailwind. And then from there, they were kind of in an awkward position, and eventually the were kind of able to beat it up. So they got a pretty favorable turn one. Game two was a longer match. It requires a lot of pivoting. The Beware's main strategy was to lead Liepard and get a lot of annoyance with moves like Fake Out and Thunder Wave and try to get some paralyzes and speed control that way. And so it ended up leading to a lot of pivoting and a lot of, difficulties for the Melodics in that aspect, but they were able to, position themselves in a way in which they were able to get some kills with their Spectre and other mons. So with that, we can go to the next match, which was Rebellion versus the Crushing Silveries. So the Rebellion match ended up being, I think, very massively dependent on turn one in game one, where Rebellion had a Choice Scarf Jinx that ended up one-shotting a Dragapult on turn one because it outspeeding. And then I believe the other mon that was next to it was the NDD Mel, which the Crushing Silveries ended up protecting. So it ended up just being a perfect turn one. I think the Silveries were able to get a little bit closer by bringing in an Unburdened Slurpuff, which was able to slow the speed of their mons with String Shot and lower and things like that. But I think pretty much turn one very much led to Rebellion being a very commanding position. Game two, I think it ended up being a little bit closer where they were able to get a Mystical Fire off and Jinx. They were able to, I believe, switch into an Ice Beam with the Ninetales. Scarf Urshifu almost killed, killing something, but it ended up being, Rebellion in the end. Large part due to the Scarf Jinx and the other, bulky mons like Magneton and Blastoise on their team. Continuing on, we have the Rolled Gold Pretzels versus the MK Mimikyus, in which the Mimikyus were able to win 2-1. So game one was really fun, where Gumi actually ended up leading with a Giga Impact Regieleki, which went in and killed a Choice Scarf Naganadel. Naganadel, however, was able to get a little bit damage off with, I believe it was Sludge Wave on turn one because it outsped Regieleki though. And so from there, they got a kill, but I think they ended up getting down 2-0 pretty quickly, where they lost both Moltres and Regieleki. However, they brought out the Lycanroc, Rogue Pretzels Lycanroc. Lycanroc ended up having White Herb, so it didn't get intimidated, so it was able to kill a Stoutland with a close combat, and then outspeed and one-shot the Thundurus with a little bit of chip from the Lapras. And however, the Aegislash did do a lot of work from the side of the Mimikyus. Game two, both switched it up, where the Pretzels brought Berserker with Fake Out Pressure and Tapu Bulu into the Naganadel and Thundurus lead from the Mimikyus. Berserker faked out the Thundurus, and then Focus Sash Tapu Bulu took a Sludge Bomb down to its sash, and then retaliated with a high horsepower, killing Naganadel. From there, Thundurus, Tapu Bulu switched in, or Tapu Fini switched in, and Thundurus Tapu Fini combination was too much for the Pretzels to handle, especially with the bulk from Bulu or Fini, and the speed from the Thundurus and damage output. So game three ended up being, I believe, the same lead from the Pretzels, which is Berserker and Tapu Bulu. However, in this situation, the Mimikyus ended up switching up their lead to, I believe, Aegislash Thundurus. And with this new lead, they kind of were able to get in a very good position, punish the lead, and get a pretty solid game three win. So with that, we can move on to the next match, which was the Tentacle Pirates versus the Machesney Park Slowpokes, where the Pirates were able to get a 2-0 win. So first things first, I'll say that the Pirates ended up having a lot of ally switches clicked, which, independently of people's thoughts, that's definitely a noteworthy thing. The game one, I believe they led Landorus and Heliolisk, and immediately ally switched on turn one into the Talonflame and I believe Silvally Ground. It makes sense since Silvally Ground was either going to go for ground move into Heliolisk or an ice move into Landorus, and the ally switch ended up doing pretty good work. The Landorus, I believe, ended up rock sliding, one-shotting the Talonflame, and then from there, just some ally switch shenanigans and some, good reads ended up causing a lot of damage to the Slowpoke's team. Game two was ended up failing a little bit closer, even though I think it ended up not being closer by Pokemon count. Game two, the Slowpokes ended up using their favorite strategy of the season thus far, which is swagger into one of their own mons. They swaggered into a Sceptile with a Lumberry. This gave it +2 attack. In addition, it gave it an unburdened speed boost, and so with that double combination, they got a +2 Sceptile and did some pretty big damage. The problem is that Sceptile's attack is not the best, and so it ended up missing a couple of damage rolls, which ended up dramatically being really sad. Some of them ended up probably being able to get them there. So I think they ended up not being able to one shot the Landorus, and then they doubled up into a Mesprit the following turn with Crunch and Heat Wave from the Talonflame, and it wasn't able to get the kill either. And so if either of those kills ended up occurring, I think the Slowpokes probably could have gotten there, but sadly they didn't get their rolls, and or they just didn't have enough damage. So definitely one of the downsides, specifically Sceptile. So with that, we have the next match, which is the Vienna Vaporeons versus the Steel Warriors. So this one was definitely a fun match. Both game one and game two, the Steel Warriors led Zorark. So Zorark got a fair amount of playtime. Sadly, Zorark, both game one and game two, copied a Mon that had a enter the battlefield trigger, and so it was immediately obvious that it was Zorark because game one, I believe they were a Torkoal, and game two, I believe they were a Dusknoir, which Torkoal has Drought and Dusknoir has Frisk. And so, Frisk or Pressure, depending on, but I think it was Frisk in the set. And so it lost a little bit out of its surprise element, but it ended up doing pretty good damage and was a fairly notable threat. However, one of the issues, with it is that I believe, other than Zorark, the Still Warriors ended up bringing a really slow team. They ended up bringing, Vikavolt and Dusknoir and Torkoal game one, and they were unable to set up Trick Room. And without being able to set up Trick Room, they kind of got into an awkward situation where Blizzards from Vanillix and, Shadow Balls from Blacephalon ended up being too much for them to handle. Game two was pretty much similar idea, except they ended up bringing out Regidrago in addition as a replacement for one of them, so they had a little bit more speed. However, once again, the speed from the Vaporeons was a little too much for them to handle, in which they brought out Latias, in which Latias was able to clean up on the Regidrago, and I believe there was an Ice Shard from a Vanillix to get a little bit of chip damage to lower the damage from the Dragon Energy from the Scarf Regidrago, which was a really nice play in game two as well. But with that, the Vaporeons were able to get a 2-0 win. Next up, we have the Bolton Bashers versus the Drowsy Dracozolt. The Bashers were able to win 2-0. So this one, the Bashers had some pretty cool tech with a non-sand rush Dracozolt that was pretty bulky and slow with a weakness policy. And so their main plan was to set up Trick Room, and then under Trick Room, they were able to get Fisher Sprints that with double damage. And they were able to take pretty good hits from the Walrein and the Liepard, and even at -2 from the Charm on the Liepard, they did pretty good damage. And so basically, for the most part, game one, it was the Trick Room was being set up, and then they had the slow Dracovish, and then the Cursula and Hippowdon for the Bashers, and those were kind of too much for the Tapu Koko and the Lipard to handle from the Dracozold side. Game two, the Bashers ended up doing Prankster, Bulk Up, Acrobatics, Tornadus. I believe they ended up having Misty Seed with Galarian Weezing having Misty Terrain. And so basically what ended up happening is I think for the most part, the Dracozols just ended up not having enough damage output. And so they kind of got a little bit of situations where they just barely missed out on some KOs, which ended up being punished notably because they ended up bringing Orbeetle and Lightbird, which are both pretty support mons, and then Walrein, which is a bulky offensive mon, but it's not the most offensive mon. And I think a lot of their damage rolls didn't do as much as they would like. The Walrein had Icicle Spear, and it didn't get that many hits in either of the times it went. And so it definitely ended up being a pretty enjoyable and fun match, but ended up being a 2-0 in favor of the Bashers. Next up, we have the Trixie Tricos versus the Miss Magical Marauders. And for the most part, the thing to say about this match was Blissey. Blissey, which was a recent pickup for Miss Mag, I believe it was picked up right before this week, ended up doing massive work. It was targeted, I think, a double up in turn one, game one. It ended up game two, I think the big one, where it got a try attack burn on a Crocodile switch in, followed by a freeze into a Mr. Mime, which then it ended up getting stay frozen the following turn. In addition to that, the Incineroar, an AV Incineroar, ended up doing a lot of work. It took a lot of the offensive moves from most of their mons, namely like the Thundurus from the Tricos or the Blaziken, and was able to threaten pretty good. And he had a little bit of healing with the Life Dew on the Blissey and the Drain Punch that was from its own moves. So there's definitely a lot of interesting things that occurred during the match. And I think, but for the most part, I'd say that Blissey was the MVP, both, mentally kind of making Otto and the Trixie Tricos feel like they need to target it, and also taking a lot of damage and getting those statuses in game two, and then healing up in game two as well. But with that, I guess we can go to the next match, which was my match against the Alola Araquanids, in which I was able to win 2-0. So game one, my opponent led a really passive lead, which was the Amoonguss Togedemaru, and I led Weavile and Darmanitan, threatening both of them notably. I faked out. They went to the double protect. The next turn, I made the read that their Amoonguss was either gonna switch out or Rage Powder. I correctly read it and got a kill on the Togedemaru. The following turn, I made a solid switch out and was not punished, and basically was able to get Darmanitan back in and basically just sweep the game with it. Game two was a lot closer, but basically what ended up happening is the Alola Arachnids set up a Iron Defense Body Press Slack Off Slowbro that ended up causing me a lot of issues, in which I was, I basically probably should have doubled up a couple times, ended up not doubling up, and so it just kept on living and taking more and more hits from me, and distracting me, and whittling down and killing some of my mons, and however, in the end game, what ended up happening was I was able to get a Blizzard off into the Turtonator and a Grapplock, and got a freeze, and the freeze ended up saving my match. There was a couple options in which I could have possibly played where I didn't need a freeze, but I definitely think that I got very lucky in the end game, in which the Slowbro kind of disrupted me enough, in which it made me get into a situation where I was not favorable, because I had a lot of damage and I had a paralysis on my Cloyster, but I was able to get there with a little bit of luck. So next up, we have the Baltimore Pankorials versus the Queen City Quagsires. This match was, I'm going to say, strange. There's a couple of either reads or misplays that ended up occurring. I believe there was a Toxicroak that did a Drain Punch into a Articuno, and they also had a different match ended up doing a drain punch into a Coffee Rodriguez. Definitely some very bold reads that ended up hurting them, I believe, in both the matches. Both of these matches were fun, and or like game one was specifically fun with the weather war, in which it was sand from the Pankorial side versus the rain of the Quagsire side. However, one of the issues with the weather matchup was that game one, the Pankorials were able to set up Tailwind with their Articuno, and so they were winning the weather war even without the weather because they were outspeeding, and so they kind of Pangoros really never not didn't have speed control, and they were able to get a pretty convincing win there. Game two, the Quagsires were able to imprison Trick Room to prevent Crawford Rodriguez from setting up Trick Room, and so it ended up causing a little bit of issues there. However, with some switches, they were able to get into pretty good position where Pre-Marina was able to kill a Hydreigon. The Dracozolt was able to, kill a Gardevoir, I believe. And then, they kind of were just able to make it really awkward for the Quagsires with some of their powerful Mons and, Pre-Marina, Tyranitar, and Dracozolt in the sand. All right, so next up we have the New York Metronomes versus the Ferocious Ursarinx. This will be the first match for the Ferocious Ursarinx, which was formerly the Ninja Squirrels. However, it was delayed, and I believe it is occurring the day of this recording. However, we're not including it in our rankings. And so, sadly, we will have to wait for next Power Rankings to see the Ursaring's first and second match in this aspect. Finally, we have the Lake Erie Wishy-Washis versus the Grandma's Togekisses, which ended up being the live premiere of the week. The Wishy-Washis were able to get a 2-1 win, and so it was definitely a fun and interesting match. So game one, the Lake Erie Wishy-Washis were able to get the win. They were able to win largely because they were able to outspeed with the Electro Web Raichu. In addition, just Togekiss and Lucario outspeeding a fair amount of the Mons that were brought by the Togekisses. So Chandelure and Charizard after -1, and me and Xiao were all at -1, were being outsped and killed, and the Metagross I don't think even outsped Togekiss naturally, and the Togekiss just offensively did a lot of work, in addition to like Lucario and, like I said, the Electro Webs from the Raichu. As the Grandma's Togekisses realized, they had a problem with speed control game one. So game two, they decided to bring their Whimsicott, and they were able to get Whimsicott and Chandelure very fast. And with that, the Wishy-Washis ended up not bringing a single fire resist. So Chandelure just offensively threatened the entirety of their team with Heat Wave. There was no clean switch ins, and redirection from Togekiss was completely useless because everything was getting hurt by Heat Waves, and they were able to outspeed because of the Whimsicott speed control. So then, after that, the Wishy-Washis adjusted and realizing that they needed fire resist on their team, and so they brought Suicune. And so Suicune was definitely the big thing. They were able to save it and kind of get into this situation where Suicune in-game basically made it such that it was a guaranteed win, and they were able to get it. So it was a very interesting match because the Wishy-Washis won, the Togekisses adjusted well and were able to win game two. Then the Wishy-Washis adjusted well and were able to get to game three. So it was definitely a very fun match, and I think it was a very worthwhile live premiere. And so with that, we are here for the rankings. Starting at number 4, sadly, it is the Ferocious Ursarinx. I think their team looks a lot better with their trades, and I'm excited to see how the new coach performs. However, we have never seen this new coach perform, and this team before the trades was 24th consistently, so they remain 24th. Next up, we have the Royal Gold Pretzels, who still have yet to win their match, and they're 05+8. They have a couple of 2-1, 1-2 losses on their belt, so they got a little bit, better in that aspect. But hopefully, they're able to get their first win. Next up, we have 22, which is the Steel Warriors. Steel Warriors, I think, got a week 1 win, and since then have been on a losing streak. And they definitely have not. They've had some pretty bad losses the last 2 weeks, and I think that's one of the reasons they're near the bottom of the 1-4 teams. Continuing up, we have the Talonflames, another team that I believe won week 1 and then has lost every week since then. I think one of the reasons they're a little bit low is I think that they've definitely have not been able to perform well against Scarf Mons, and they definitely need to, adjust and show that they can take out a Scarf Mon in the lead. Next up, we have 20, which is the New York Metronomes. They have yet to play. That's one of the reasons why they're around here. They're 1-3. If they're 1-4, they might be around here. If they're 2-3, they're probably notably higher in the rankings, but it's hard to adjust them too much because they have yet to play. So with that, we can go to number 19, which is the Drowsy Dracosults, who's 1-4 -5. So the Dracosults have had a 3-week losing streak, which is definitely being a little bit bad, and they've had, I think, 2 consecutive weeks of O2s, if I recall properly. However, they did make 2 trades, which was, I believe, Rizian for Gorgeist and Swampert for the Barraskewda. I personally really like some of the trades. I believe Gorgeist is very significantly better mon than Verizian, and I think it could be very useful. The Barraskewda's speed is very impressive. Its damage output is really nice, and they have some synergies with Lipart with both of these mon technically. However, the Dragon results are definitely one of 1-4 teams, so you can't be too high in the power rankings. But hopefully with these trades, they can do notably better. With that, we can go up to number 18, which is the Machesney Park Slowpokes, who are 2-3. I think technically they went up in rankings, but they're near the bottom of the 2-win teams. They had an 0-2 loss that didn't look too great. I definitely have some faith that they're going to do pretty well, and I'm excited to see them rest of the seasons. I definitely have enjoyed their matches, and with that, we can go to number 17, which the Alola Araquanids, who are also 2-3. The Araquanids, I think, had a pretty tough loss to me this week, and I definitely think that's part of the reason why they're a little bit lower on the 2-3 teams. However, I do think their team is very good, and I think and I believe that their Slowbro is near the top, if not the actual top in kill leaders, and that's also going pretty well for them. Continuing on, we have the Bistro Bewares, who are 2-3 -1. I think they're a little bit higher on some of the 2-3 teams because they had a pretty close set with Rex. In addition to that, they have a pretty good differential as a whole, and so I definitely think they're one of the better 2-3 teams, even if they're not as near the top. Next up, we have the Queen City Quagsires, who are 2-3 -2. So this one, had the pretty tough loss, but I think one of the big ones is losing to Panda is always, always expected and not too bad at lowering your rankings. And so, I think that's one of the big things with the Quagsires. They definitely have had some impressive losses for the most part. However, they definitely need to get a little bit, hopefully get a little bit more wins to get up to the top half of the rankings. So nearing, the top of the 2-3 teams, we have the Grandma's Toga Kisses, who 2-3 -3. So they're definitely not the best differential team. However, they had a really nice performance against a really good team in the Lake Erie Wishy-Washis and the live premiere. I definitely think that's one of the big reasons why some of the power ranking people put them so high. It's just because they had, they had such a nice match, and it showed their skills and their adjustments as a coach. Continuing on, we have Mad Rex, who I believe is the second highest 2-3 team, which for a couple of reasons. 1-2-3 -3, so or -1, so they're definitely near the top, if not tied for the top differential. In addition to that, Rex has had a solid, I believe, two win streak, which definitely helps. And I think Rex was also a pretty high week 0 power rankings, in addition to being a previous champion in S and I think quarter or semifinalist of playoffs last season. So we have a lot of respect to them as a player. Finally, though, we have the highest 2-3 team, which is the Miss Magical Marauders. They are -1, so they're tied for the highest differential. They had a very impressive win against one of the undefeated teams and a two-time champion in the VDL. So definitely an impressive win, and they definitely played very well as a whole. In addition to that, and then on top of all of those things, Miss Mag and the Miss Magical Marauders, I believe, were around 4th or to 6th of the week's year power ranking. So overall, I think a lot of people like their team as well. Continuing on to number 11, which is the first 3 and 2 team, which is the Vienna Vaporians. Personally, I think they are very, possibly a little bit better on some of these 3-2 teams. However, a lot of the 3-2 teams are, really close in my opinion. 3-2 plus 3 is a pretty solid differential as well. Honestly, I think there's pretty high justification that they could be a little bit better on these rankings. I think the big thing is they're just ranked a little bit lower previous weeks, and so people didn't want to raise them too high. But with a solid 2-0 win and their differential, they are pretty high on the differentials of 3-2 teams. And so I definitely could see justification to put them even higher than this, because I believe they're just tied for second highest differential. But continuing on, we have number 10, which is the Crescent Silveries. The Christian Silveries had an 0-2 loss, and so definitely puts them a little bit down. And in addition, the team that beat them is also a 3-2 team, so I believe that's another reason why some of the, they're a little bit lower, despite being really high. I believe at some point they were as high as 2 in the power rankings. But this loss definitely hurt them, especially since I think a lot of people would consider it a favorable matchup. Continuing up, we have number 9, which is Rebellion, the coach that beat them. I think that's one thing that a lot of the power rankers, including myself, kind of do is, when there's a close call, if there was a head-to-head, pick the team that won in the head-to-head. And in this situation, Rebellion was the team that won. And on top of that, they have a slightly better differential at 3-2 plus 2. Other than that, though, I have really liked Rebellion's team since they made their trades, and they've been playing quite well. Continuing on, we have number 8, which is the Bolton Bashers, who are 3-2 plus 3. Personally, I think the big reason why the Bashers are as high as they are is because a lot of our rankers really like the strength and skill of Goomer, the coach of the Bashers as a whole, being a 2-time champion. In addition, though, they have also played against a lot of very powerful teams, and they've either won or had very close matches. And so I definitely think that's a favorable thing. Continuing on, we have number 7, which is the highest 3-2 team, which is myself, Sting Like a Rabombi. So I think one of the biggest reasons, and probably the reason that I am the highest rank, is I am currently 3-2 plus 4, which is not only the highest differential of all the 3-2 teams, it's actually the highest possible differential of a 3-2 team, which means all my losses have been 1-2, and all my wins have been 2-0s. Yep, no, I think that's basically it. There's not much other reason why I'm this high. Obviously, being a on an ice team, I think there's, some people just like ranking me higher because they like it. But I think the big reason's the differential here. Continuing on, we have our first 4-1 team, which is the MK Mimikyus. They had a pretty bad loss last week, which ends up, putting them on the lower of the 4-1 teams. And then they also didn't have a very commanding victory to a team that had yet to win a game in the World Gold Pretzels. And so I think that's some of the reasons why they're not as high in the power rankings as a 4-1 team, because they didn't, they had a bad loss followed by not a convincing victory on that team. Continuing on, we have the Trixie Tricos, who are 4-1 plus 4. I think obviously they historically have been a little bit higher, but I think the 0-2 loss from onto the Mismagical Marauders definitely put them a little bit lower. At this point, the power rankings for the 4-1 teams are so close that any loss, that doesn't look super nice, can definitely lower you a couple points. But other than that, 4-1 plus 4 is definitely a solid differential. Continuing on, we have number 4, the Lake Erie Wishy-Washies, who had the really interesting and fun 3-game live premiere. I think the big thing with this was just showing the Wishy-Washies showing their skills to adjust mid-set, and being able to figure out what's the optimal thing, and showed their skill as a coach really well, and definitely put them a little bit higher in the power rankings than they were in previous weeks. Continuing on, we have the highest 4-1 team, which is the Tentacle Pirates. I think one of the biggest reasons the Tentacle Pirates are the highest are, once again, differential. They are the highest differential at 4-1 plus 5 on all the 4-1 teams. And so definitely, I think that's a big aspect of them being as high as they are. However, in addition to that, I do think that a 2-0 win is always really nice at making, team look pretty good. And in addition, I think we gave them a little bit more credit because last week we ranked them pretty low because they had yet to have their match. Um, so, this includes 2 matches from them and both of them being pretty nice wins. So now we go up to our 5-win teams, which we start with the Miss Magical Marauders. Miss Magical Marauders are not only the highest team, they currently have the highest differential in 5-0 plus 9. And they've been looking great this entire season. I think, there's a lot of argument for them to be number 1 team because of the differential and them, winning and playing so well. However, it's very hard to dethrone the ranked number 1 team, which is the Pankorials at 5-0 plus 8. Not only are they also undefeated, and not only were they week 0 number 1 ranked team based on their team composition, they're also the reigning champion and have been playing incredibly well. And obviously, once again, for the 5th week in a row, they end up being ranked number 1. Here are our final rankings, as you can see. Um, you know, hopefully, hopefully, y'all enjoy the positions there, everyone. Um, as per always, these are just our opinions, so don't take them too seriously. In addition, there's still hope for everyone in the VDL to make playoffs, so don't give up hope. Keep on trying. And also, in addition to that, if you want to remain in V next season, you can also try to, show off your skills. And if nothing else, you can try some cool sets. I definitely, don't expect to be as high as I am going to be next week because I'm not feeling great about this week's match, especially since I'm playing against the number 3 overall team. So wish me some luck there, but I also wish everyone else luck who, anyone who needs a win to really want to win. I wish y'all luck. And with that, thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll talk to y'all next week.